Welcome to the Patriotic Pulpit. I am Bill Lockwood. We thank you for listening to the program. We've talked a lot about the Roman Catholic Church, the apostasy from the New Testament. The Apostolic Church of the New Testament looks nothing like the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Church is actually an apostasy from the New Testament. It is a totalitarian government that is run by an uninspired pope. And so one of the things that I want to notice today, this is in the news right now regarding the Pope, Pope Francis. This is according to Newsmax article. The Pope hits Trump and Vance over migrant deportations. There are many things that show the Pope is uninspired. He does not know what he's talking about. He's unbiblical. He's unscriptural. The very pompous attitude that he has and the idea that he is a vicar of Christ is absolutely nonsense. It is not biblical at all. But here's something right here in the news today. I had intended to do other lessons regarding other segments regarding the priesthood and the right to marry and the idea of the Pope and Peter being the first Pope and all of the errors that are taught by the Roman Catholic Church. But I thought maybe perhaps this one right now in the news is something we ought to talk about. So this is just out of the news, February 11th, where the Pope criticizes Trump and Vance over migrant deportations. So the story reads this way. Pope Francis issued a major rebuke Tuesday to the Trump administration's mass deportation of migrants, warning that the forceful removal of people purely because of their illegal status deprives them of their inherent dignity and will end badly. Francis took the remarkable step of addressing the U.S. migrant crackdown in a letter to U.S. bishops in which he appeared to take direct aim at Vice President J.D. Vance's defense of the deportation program on theological grounds. So here, this is going to be interesting on theological grounds. So right here in biblical terminology. So we'll talk about that in a moment. History's first Latin American pope has long made caring for migrants a priority of his pontificate, demanding that countries welcome, protect, promote, integrate those fleeing conflicts, poverty, and climate disaster. Or those fleeing, I should say. Those people fleeing conflicts, poverty, and climate disaster. Francis has also said governments are expected to do so to the limits of their capacity. The Argentine Jesuit and President Donald Trump have long sparred over migration, including before Trump's first administration, when Francis famously said that anyone who builds a wall to keep out migrants was, quote, not a Christian. In the letter, Francis said nations have the right to defend themselves to keep the community safe from criminals. That said, he added, the act of deporting people who in many cases have left their own land for reasons of extreme poverty, insecurity, exploitation, persecution, or serious deterioration of the environment damages the dignity of many men and women, of entire families, and places them in a state of particular vulnerability and defenselessness, he wrote. Then he cited the biblical stories of migration, the people of Israel, the book of Exodus, Jesus Christ's own experience. Francis affirmed the right of people to seek shelter and safety in other lands and said he was concerned with what was going on in the United States. Quote, I have followed closely the major crisis that is taking place in the United States with the initiation of a program of mass deportations. The rightly formed conscience cannot fail to make a critical judgment and express its disagreement with any measure that tacitly or explicitly identifies the illegal status of some migrants with criminality. End of quote. So let's just stop here for a moment and take stock of what Francis had to say. As I pointed out, there are many things that show that Francis and all of the popes are not inspired of God, and here's one of them right here. Not only is he unbiblical, but he also shows us the deep-seated hypocrisy that is built into the Roman Catholic system. For example, the Vatican itself is a protected place. They don't just let anybody in. I visited the Vatican a year and a half ago, and the line is extremely long. They have these gigantic walls. That was actually given to them, the Vatican, by one of the dictators in history, that is Mussolini. We'll talk about that in a future podcast. So interesting how Mussolini gave them the Vatican territory, the acreage upon which it is built. They have these walls defending it. It looks like a medieval system because the papacy is a medieval system. So number one, what hypocrisy to have a walled city that protects the Pope, and he has a communistic style system, top-down control, that you can't get in there unless you go through these metal detectors, and they have security everywhere in the Vatican. You can't get in there. And they don't let just anybody in. Not only that, but the Vatican is one of the richest countries in the world. It is fabulously wealthy. I pointed out in the past that I've had a debate with Bob Sungenis, and I asked him to come back to Wichita Falls and let's have another discussion. He said, you have to pay for my way, you have to pay for my hotels. I thought, this is ridiculous. The Vatican, the Roman Catholic Church, is one of the richest institutions in the world. And they have aggrandized their money through fraud, deceit, all kinds of things through the years, through the centuries, and yet they want me to pay to have a discussion, to pay for a defendant to come forward from Roman Catholicism. That is absolutely absurd. But the point here I'm making is they have the money, they have the resources. Let them take care of people in their own Vatican, not in American law. Number two, American law states exactly what Trump is defending, and that is that migrants can only come through the places of access that we allow, and we have the ability to screen those migrants. That was not done under the Biden administration, but Trump is actually going back to the law. So it's not President Trump or J.D. Vance that Pope Francis has problems with. It is American law. And that's right. The Roman Catholic Church is a totalitarian system that now has become, through Francis, a socialistic system that demands that we tear down our walls, we tear down our fences, we tear down our law, and allow anybody to come in here. That is ridiculous. The Pope himself does not know the fact that it is American law that Trump is actually now enforcing, that Joe Biden refused to do. And by the way, the same thing goes with the Democrats in Congress. The Democrats in Congress, they are screaming continually to high heaven. And they're talking about Trump, and also Elon Musk. Trump is simply enforcing the law. If you Democrats don't like it, change the law. And you can do it in Congress instead of getting up and hollering and screaming and talking about it. And Chuck Schumer leading, along with Maxine Waters, leading some kind of chant against Trump out on the courthouse steps or out on the congressional steps. Ridiculous. If you don't like what he's doing, change the law. Oh, you can't. Oh, you can't. Because that has to go through the will of the people. Oh, yeah, that's right. You can't do it that way. That's what's happening. Number three, and perhaps this is the most important right here. Francis doesn't even know his Bible. He doesn't even know what the Bible teaches. He just told us that the Bible teaches us to take in strangers and not to enforce the border laws of America. Let's just take a look at what the Bible actually does teach, shall we? Number one, God himself established borders of nations. I'd like for Roman Catholic friends to come to grips with this. Acts 17 and 26. Please come to grips with the Bible itself. Here's the passage. God has made of one every nation of men to dwell upon the face of the earth, having determined their appointed seasons and the bounds of their habitation. Note the several elements, the constituent elements of the passage. Number one, God has made of every nation one. He made from one every nation of mankind. That is, in direct opposition to the then current Greek belief that their own origin was superior to other races. All people are equal. So far, so good. Number two, God determined their appointed times, that is, their divinely appointed periods. Nations rise and fall because of God. Daniel chapter 4, verse 17. Nations do not rise and fall without God. It is not survival of the fittest. Number three, and here's the point that Francis needs to learn. Boundaries of nations are divinely fixed. However, modern man wishes to understand the providence of God, Paul plainly states that God has a hand in national boundaries. A boundary is a barrier to allow that keeps anybody from flowing in. That's what a boundary is, my Roman Catholic friends. The classic Old Testament text on this subject is Deuteronomy 32 and verse 8. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the children of men, separated. The last comment about separating the children of men refers to the division between peoples at the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11 and 8. There we have God separated the nations himself. Number two. Now we talked about number one. God himself established borders of nations. That's Acts 17:26, Genesis 11 and 8, Deuteronomy 32 and 8. Number two. God demanded that Israel respect the borders of other nations. Isn't it interesting? As Israel came out of Egypt, the people were to bypass some of the nations, respecting their borders because God had given those nations that territory. One of the nations was Edom. God said in Deuteronomy 2 and 5, read it, I have given Mount Seir to Esau for a possession. Therefore, the Lord said, Israel was not to enter into it. He said the same regarding the country of Moab. Later, Numbers chapter 20, when Israel, under the leadership of Moses, applied to Edom to pass through the territory on the way to Canaan, Edom said no. Moses and Israel applied a second time, and Israel was refused a second time. They had to turn to go another way. God did not allow them to crash the borders of the nation of Edom. A nation has a right to determine who comes into its territory, and even God's selected leader, inspired of God, Moses, could not violate that right. On the other hand, God had prior appointed that the territory of the Amorite and the Canaanite, those in Palestine who were living there, should be given to Israel. That's Deuteronomy chapter 1. That was because divine judgment upon the Canaanite nations, Genesis chapter 15, verses 15 and 16. And that was because of the extreme wickedness, including child sacrifice. Number three, once they were settled in Canaan, the Israelites were sternly warned on multiple occasions to drive the Canaanites out of the land. Even 40 years previously, when Israel was still at Mount Sinai, God had promised to drive the inhabitants of Canaan out, Exodus 33 and verse 2. And once Joshua took the leadership, conquered most of Canaan, he commanded the cooperation of the Israelites in driving out the Canaanites. That's Joshua chapter 17. And the stated reason for driving out the nations that formerly inhabited Israel was to preserve the culture of Israel. The word culture itself refers to the religious presuppositions that lie beneath a society. So here are the words of the text, Numbers 33, verses 51 and 52. When you pass over the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall drive out the inhabitants of the land before you and destroy all of their figured stones, destroy all of their molten images, demolish all their high places of idol worship, and you shall take possession of the land. Moses continued in verse 55. But if you will not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then shall those that let you remain of them, they will be as pricks in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall vex you in the land wherein you dwell. That Israel did not drive out the Canaanite people from Israel is the theme of the book of Judges. That's what Judges is about. They did not do what God told them to do. The rest of the book shows perfectly well what occurs when a culture is not preserved. The book of Judges shows a downfall. One professor wisely told me this: marriage is not a reformatory program. It's not a reformatory school. That is to say, you get what you marry. What you see is what you get. So also, Pope Francis, open borders is not a missionary program. It is a recipe for disintegration, complete annihilation of what is left of America's Christian culture. I'm not saying we should not try to evangelize. I'm not saying we should not try to do missionary work among people that are of foreign nations. I'm not saying that we should not assist those people, but it is all voluntary. It is not break down the walls, let them come in, and you take care of them. No, Pope Francis doesn't know what he's about when it comes to the Bible, and that's because he has no authority from God whatsoever. So that's what's taking place with Pope Francis. So, thinking about what he had to say, I want to finish it up with what White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said last week, that more than 8,000 people have been arrested in immigration enforcement's actions since Trump took office January 20. Some have been deported, others are being held in federal prisons, and still others held at Guantanamo Bay Naval Base in Cuba. Now, Vance is a Catholic convert, has defended the administration's America First crackdown by citing a concept from medieval Catholic theology known in Latin as Ordo Amoris. He has contended that the concept delineates a hierarchy of care to family first, followed by neighbor, community, fellow citizens, and lastly, those elsewhere. But here's my advice to J.D. Vance. Get out of the Roman Church. You don't find the Roman Catholic Church in the New Testament. You don't find anything that is peculiar to Roman Catholic doctrine in the New Testament. You don't find the adoration of Mary in the New Testament. You don't find the Pope in the New Testament. You don't find that Peter was a Pope. You don't find any of it. You don't find the Vatican. It is a totalitarian system that is completely at odds with the Bible and has done its best. The Roman Church has done its best through the centuries to cover up the Bible, keep the people in the dark regarding what the Bible actually teaches. They had in the medieval ages, they had what was called the chained Bible. That is, the Bible was literally chained in the building, and they didn't want people to see it. They didn't want people to know it. Apparently, the Bible is still chained from Pope Francis. He doesn't know what the Bible teaches. Sad, isn't it? So we'll be back more with Roman Catholic apostasy later, also tying it in with what's taking place in America and immigration and other elements that we will see in a future podcast. Thank you for listening.